my screen. Okay. Can you guys see this? My screen.
Yeah.
Okay. So, once again, we're gonna review the speeches if we have time at the end of today's lesson, but today we're just gonna mostly be talking about constructives. So the constructive is the first speech in public forum debate. Overall, there's 4 speeches that you'll do throughout the debate, but constructive is the first one, and it's going to be 4 minutes. The point of the constructive speech is to build your argument, and in debate, we call each separate argument a contention. So whereas, in your like literary essay, you might write like, oh, paragraph 1 is like proving one point and paragraph 2 is proving another point. Here in debate, we call them contentions 1, 2, and 3. So for example, contention 1 could be war and contention 2 could be health. So we normally like name our contentions. And the constructive is about why your side is correct, not why the other side isn't correct. So it's not like, my opponents are wrong for XYZ reasons. Instead, it's telling you why the judge should support your side. So for example, one of the topics this year, actually this January, was the US federal government should legalize all illicit drugs. And illicit just means illegal drugs. So what this is saying is that we should not make drugs like cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, and like, weed and like other types of drugs. We should actually legalize them so people can like use them and produce them without going to jail. So in debate, there's 2 sides, right? The affirmative and the negation, or you can call them aff and neg or pro and con. And the affirmative says like agrees to the resolution. So right here, the US federal government should legalize all illicit drugs. The affirmative would be supporting the idea that the US federal government should legalize drugs. On the other hand, the negation would say no, the US federal government shouldn't legalize all illicit drugs, and they would state their arguments. So on pro, an example, for this topic could be contention 1 is treatment. Once we legalize these illegal drugs, people aren't afraid to like go to jail when they say, oh yeah, by the way, I took like heroin. Like when that happens, usually if you tell the police that, they'll just like lock you up in jail because you just like, confess that you're committing a crime. But once you legalize it, right, it's not illegal to use drugs anymore. So now people can be like, yeah, I use heroin and I need treatment for my addiction because I'm like addicted to heroin, and then they can get the help they need. A contention 2 for pro could be incarceration. So right now, a lot of people are like locked up because they use like, marijuana or like other types of drugs, which can be really harmful for people because like once you're in jail, it's like really hard to find a job afterwards because most people don't want to hire like, a criminal. So once we legalize all these drugs, like people can get out of jail and they can like, find jobs and support their families. On the other side is the con or the negation. It's saying, okay, legalizing drugs would be a bad idea for XYZ reasons, right? And contention 1 is addiction. So this is like, if we make drugs legal, then a lot of people are going to use them and they're going to get addicted, which is, a bad thing because they could like die from taking too many drugs, or there's like a lot of bad health issues, right? Contention 2 could also be cartels, which is basically like there's like a lot of drug cartels, these like crime mobs that like sell drugs to people. And if you like legalize drugs in the US, these like people who are, in these cartels, they could be selling these drugs to people in America. They can make a lot of money. And usually these cartels come with like a lot of violence because of like the way they're structured, right? They're like crime mobs. If you ever like watch a movie, they're like the bad guys and they like kill a lot of people, right? So does anyone have any questions on like the point of a constructive or, aff or neg? Okay. I'll assume that's no. So now you guys can try. The US should ban the sale of firearms or like all guns. So what is one contention or one argument that supports this topic. Like, yes, the US should ban the sale of firearms. Can anyone give me one idea?
Gun violence has gone up a lot in the recent past years, so it's another reason that the US should ban firearms.
Yeah, that's really good, William. So if we like ban firearms, people wouldn't be like getting these guns and like shooting a lot of people with them, right? So we could save lives. Can anyone give me a reason why we shouldn't ban the sale of guns?
They can be used for self-defense and not for harmful reasons. So they can be useful, like, say someone's attacking you.
Yeah, exactly. So, if like a robber came into your house or if someone is trying to kill you with a knife, if you have a gun, you can be like, hey, stop, I'm going to shoot you if you're trying to hurt me. So that's another great contention idea. All right, so the first step to writing a good constructive, so in debate, this 4-minute speech is usually pre-written beforehand, right? And all our arguments are put into like a mini essay, and this is what we call a case. So when I'm reading my case, what I'm saying is I'm reading my arguments for my pro or neg side. So the first step to writing a good case is understanding the resolution, and the resolution is just another word for the topic. So when you're trying to understand the resolution, you want to define key terms in the resolution. You want to brainstorm general ideas, and it can be very helpful to discuss with like fellow debaters, like you guys just did now, reasons why it's good and reasons why it's bad. In the past, there's also been on balance topics. And these topics, the word on balance just means that you can include past impacts as well. So for example, the current topic right now for February actually is on balance, Turkey's membership is beneficial to NATO. Um, if we're defining key terms here, Turkey is a country in Europe, and then NATO is like this military organization that the US is part of, right? So, and Turkey is part of NATO. So the on balance word just means that, okay, in the past and in the present and maybe in the future, right? Turkey's membership overall is beneficial to NATO. So you can look at like, oh, in the past, Turkey has been like harassing other countries in the membership, or like Turkey has started wars. That's reasons why you shouldn't vote for them, right? And um, for most topics, you can look to the past, but more so often we are having an emphasis on the future, right? It's like not past actions, but instead it's like, okay, we can look to past actions and say this could happen again in the future. For example, if we're going back to this, legalizing illicit drugs contention, you can say, oh yeah, in the past when we, legalized weed, for example, in Washington, we've actually legalized marijuana, weed, which is a type of drug, right? In Washington, after we legalized marijuana, the use of marijuana actually increased and more people got addicted. That's a bad thing. But it's not really applicable to the resolution because this is talking about the US should legalize all illicit drugs, in the future. We're talking about what will happen after it's legalized. We're not talking about what has already happened. In contrast, on balance is like, okay, we can look at the past and we can look at the future. Does on balance make sense to everyone?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. And if you guys have any questions or you don't want to like speak, out, you can just type it in the chat and I will be looking at the chat too. On the other hand, there can be on balance topics, but there are usually should topics or like actionable resolutions, which are like the US should do this, or, Turkey should do this, or China should do this. So it's like in the future, they will do this, right? One example of like 4 years ago, this was topic, the US federal government should implement price controls on the pharmaceutical industry. Now, this is a really good practice to define key terms. So does anyone know what the pharmaceutical industry is?
Like medicine.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, the pharmaceutical industry is basically like all the companies that produce, drugs or medicine, not like cocaine, but like drugs that save your life, right? Does anyone know what a price control is?
Is it like limits to what the medicine should cost?
Exactly. Yeah, it's exactly what it sounds like. So a control on the price. So this can either be a price floor, which is like, oh, you have to sell it for a minimum of $3. You can't sell lower than $3. Or more like typically it's a price ceiling, which is like, okay, you can't sell this drug for more than $100, right? So that's what a price control is. And defining these terms is really important for one, to understand the resolution, but then second of all, if anyone makes abusive arguments, which are like unfair arguments, right? So in the past, when I've debated this topic, like people define the pharmaceutical industry as like the insurance companies that like give you your healthcare and your medicine, which is like not really related to like, you know, companies that actually produce these life-saving medications. And if people define it in a weird way, it can really take out a lot of your case if you don't respond. So that's another reason why it's really important to make sure you define the key terms in a resolution. Okay. And then, you know, most resolutions can range from international topics to domestic policy, to US and the other countries, to the economy, to healthcare. So there's like a wide variety. So also in public forum, the topic changes every 2 months or 1 month. So there's one topic for September and October, and then it changes for another topic for November to December. And then you get one in January, a different one in February, a different one in March, and a different one in April, and a different one in June.
Wasn't
Yeah.
the pharmaceutical that topic like last year?
It was actually 4 years ago,
Oh.
but
Oh wait. Oh.
yeah,
Okay.
but that was like the one that we were debating last year that we were using because it's like pretty easy to understand.
Okay.
Yeah, but usually you'll never see like the same topic come up twice because these are all, you know, about pressing issues in the status quo. So you won't see something like, oh, the US should not have invaded Vietnam or like something like that, right? Like you won't see topics that are only about the past. You'll see topics about current issues like, oh, the US should pull troops out of like Afghanistan or like Syria or like things like that, right? Okay. So here is the structure of an argument, and I've put an example of a contention I wrote here. And this is also this contention was written for the resolution that was the US federal government should legalize all illicit drugs. So the basic structure of an argument has three parts. You're going to have a link, which is the connections between arguments, like this will lead to this. The second thing is a warrant. So why does what you're saying happen? And then the third is the impact. And what is really important about the impact is you want to implicate it to actually impact on a person. So the implication of an impact just means that your impact affects like the average person, right? So for example, a lot of people might say like, oh, if we legalize drugs, we can there's going to be a lot of drug companies which improves our economy, right? But that is an impact. You know, the economy improves, let's say by like $100 million. There is no implication there because we don't know what this means for the average American or the average person, right? So what you need to do is you need to take it one step further and implicate what that means for the person. So the legalizing drugs means there's more drug companies, which increases the economy by $100 million. This is really important because like increasing the economy by $100 million would lift 1 million people out of poverty by providing more jobs, right? So the implication here is the 1 million jobs that people get. That's like the impact. So here is a contention I wrote for the legalizing all drugs topics. This is just my second contention, but it's about human rights. Subpoint A is mass incarceration. So usually when you see you know, cases, you'll see them cite evidence as the name of the source, right? And then which was in this case SP. So if it was like the New York Times, it would be the New York Times. And then 20 just means it's in 2020. So we use the last 2 digits of the year. So something written this year would be SP 2022, right? So it would just be SP 22. Finds that there are over 2 million people in American prisons. The Drug Policy Alliance 17 finds the war on drugs has been the driver of mass incarceration. And incarceration is just another word for jail. Mass jailing in the US. Indeed, TSP 16 finds nonviolent drug offenders make up 16% of state prisons and 50% of federal prisoners. Luckily, the DPA 21 finds drug legalization would remove drug-related crimes, reducing prison populations. For example, American 14 finds after Portugal decriminalized drugs, their prison population declined 47%. And then we can skip down here. Right here, Davy 17 finds mass incarceration imposes massive social economic costs by removing people from their jobs and families. And then we can skip to the bottom. As a result, the CCC 18 finds if not for the rise in incarceration, the number of people in poverty would fall by 20%, lifting 8 million people out of poverty. So here we can look for the link, right? The link is that the war on drugs is the driver of mass incarceration, or basically the reason why a lot of people are in jail. That's basically what this says, right? Because these drug offenders make up 16% of prisons and 50% of federal prisoners. So this is like kind of the, a background for the judge, right? A lot of people are in jail because they take drugs. Luckily, the DPA 21 finds drug legalization would remove drug-related crimes, reducing prison populations. So here's the link. Basically, it's saying that when we legalize drugs, right, when we say, oh, it's not a crime to smoke weed, then we can reduce prison populations because people like no longer can go to jail for smoking weed, right? Because now you can just smoke it and you won't get to jail. And people who were like previously locked up in jail for, smoking weed, they would be released. So that is the link. So the warrant, why does this happen, right? The warrant is usually not spelled out super clearly, but it can be implicated in the link and in the impact. So why does this happen? You can see that drug legalization would remove drug-related crimes. This is kind of the warrant, right? By legalizing drugs, there's no more like crime associated with it, so there's no way that anyone can be locked up for it. That's the warrant, right? And warrants are not like only applicable to links, right? Warrants go for everything. So the explanation behind why things happen can apply to impacts, right? So why does your impact happen? We can see right here, my impact is lifting 8 million people out of poverty, right? You can see that it's implicated because, it's 8 million people out of poverty. It's an impact on a human. What is the warrant for that? Now we can look back to Davy 17, which tells you that mass incarceration removes people from their jobs and families, which compounds inequalities, right? So basically what this is saying is the warrant here is that because when you're locked up in jail, you can't go to work, you're not earning money. So people and their families fall into poverty. Once you like let these people out of prisons, they can go find their jobs again, right? So then they'll be lifted out of poverty. So does that make sense to anyone? Is there like any confusion on link, warrant, or impact? Okay. I'll assume there's no question. So now you guys can try. I'll give you like a minute to just read over this, but I'm gonna ask you in a minute to identify the link, the warrant. Okay, we're just gonna identify the link and the impact first, and then we'll identify the warrant later. Okay. Is everyone done reading this?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just say like one thing. Psychedelics are just like a specific type of drug. It's like a component. There's like different categories for drugs, right? And psychedelics is one type. So, let's see. William, can you tell me what the link is?
Um, like, wait, the link like connects the evidence and the reasoning, right?
So what the link does, yeah, I didn't explain this well enough, but link is connecting the resolution to your impact, right? Or between arguments. So for example, a link would be like, if my dog dies, I will be sad, and then I will get depression. I will be sad is like the linking my dog dying and me getting depression, right? If I just told you, oh, my dog dies and I'll get depression, like that doesn't make sense, right? But I say instead, my dog dies, I'm sad, then I get depression. The link is I'm sad. So the link here, what I'm looking for is what connects the resolution, legalizing all drugs, to whatever the impact is in this scenario.
Oh, okay. So, like, well, isn't like the impact 51 million Americans suffer from mental disorder?
Yeah. So what is the link to that? How do we get from the resolution to the impact?
Oh, like, isn't there like a lot of links?
Okay. Can you name one of them?
Um, uh, because the Act of 1970 banned drugs with psychedelic use, and deemed them illegal.
Okay. That's not necessarily the link. That's like the background information, right? This has already happened. But what will legalizing drugs do to solve these 51 million Americans per year? Sarah, what do you think the link is? Sorry, not Sarah. I mean Sophia. Oh my God, I'm tripping.
Okay, it's fine. I think it's when it says that decades of research have shown psychedelics are the most effective treatment for a range of mental disorders such as depression, anxiety, and drug addiction.
Okay, that's very close, actually. Tyler, what do you think the link is?
The link could be like from the like the decades of research have shown wait, how do you pronounce that again? I don't really know how to pronounce it.
Psychedelics?
Psychedelics are most effective treatment for a range, and yeah, from that sentence, and then as a result, that part is the link.
Okay. So you guys are actually very close in saying that part is a link. It's kind of like you can say an internal link or like the warrant, right? So what I was trying to point you guys towards, the link is Nielsen 21. The legalization of psychedelics are needed to address the national mental health crisis. Only psychedelic-based therapies have shown the real potential to end many health disorders. So actually William also kind of got at this, right? So right now, psychedelics are illegal, right? So what is the link between the resolution and solving mental illnesses? It's not that psychedelics can cure mental illnesses, right? Even if psychedelics can cure mental illnesses, they're still illegal, right? So like people can't take them anyway, so they're not going to cure them in illness. But what is going to allow these people to take the drugs? That's the legalization of psychedelics, right? That comes from the resolution because it says to legalize all illegal drugs. And right now, psychedelics are illegal. So the link is that, oh, we're going to legalize these drugs. Now people can take these drugs and then we're going to cure mental disorder. So what you guys were pointing towards, which is really good, is the internal link, which is also like the reasoning behind the reasoning behind why the link is true, right? So why does legalizing these psychedelics solve people's mental illnesses? The reasoning is because psychedelics are the most effective treatment for these mental disorders because of like research, right? So you guys are actually very close. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So next we're gonna move on to how to create contentions / research. So you know, sometimes when you get a topic like on balance, Turkey's membership is beneficial to NATO, you have like no idea what this even means, right? Like, what is Turkey? What is NATO? Like, I have no idea. The best thing to do is to search the term first. So like, in this case, we'll use legalizing drugs as an example. So it will be like, oh, what is a illicit drug? Oh, that means they're illegal drugs, right? And you want to do some general reading on the topic. Usually from there, you'll be able to get more contention ideas than you're just like gonna brainstorm off the top of your head, right? So for a topic like legalizing drugs, you can just search like why we should / shouldn't legalize drugs, or you could be like, oh, pros and cons to legalizing drugs, why we should, why we shouldn't, right? After that, you'll kind of have an idea of the specific type or like what kind of evidence you're looking for once you get the contention ideas, right? So for example, if I search up like the benefits of legalizing drugs, and then I find, oh, legalizing drugs allows people to access treatment. Okay, so now I know what kind of evidence I want. I want evidence that says, people don't seek treatment right now because drugs are illegal and they're scared to be like locked up, you know, if they like confess that they've used drugs. Second, I probably want some sort of evidence that shows that treatment is effective in curing like people's addiction. And then third, I probably want an impact, right? Like, oh, how many people are actually addicted right now and how many people could we cure if we legalize drugs? A lot of the time you might find like a block like, oh, I can't find like evidence for how many people are, you know, going to be cured after we legalize drugs. A lot of the time what's really funny is you can search the reverse term. So sometimes I search like, oh, what I want to find is drug evidence for drugs are addictive. What I would search is why drugs aren't addictive. And then you just get like a bunch of the opposite research for some reason, which like makes no sense, but that's the way Google search works. I don't know. So for example, if you want to search up why drugs aren't addictive, you would search why drugs are addictive. And then sometimes if you like scroll, you'll be able to find the evidence that you're looking for. So when you're researching, you want to make sure you're going to find evidence for the link, warrant, and the impact. So, you know, perhaps unlike your literary analysis essay where you just like, you know, get a piece of evidence from the text, you're like, okay, roses are red. Okay. Or yeah, right. And then you start like analyzing that piece through your own thoughts, like, oh, you know, this symbolizes like she's super sad or like angry because red is like a color that represents like anger and like, you know, like, oh, she's looking at the roses and she's like feeling all these bad emotions. Instead of that, it's really debate is really evidence-based, right? So for each step of the argument, you want to have some sort of evidence to back it up. You can't just like say, like, you know, everyone knows that like drugs are bad for you, right? You could probably go up to tell a judge, be like, oh, drugs can lead to like cancer. But in debate, you can't say it without evidence, even if it's common knowledge, right? You still need to have a piece of evidence like, oh, the New York Times tells us that taking drugs decreases your like lifespan by 10% or something, right? And that makes you sound a lot more credible and gives you a lot more specific information. So right now I will show you guys me writing for the US federal government should implement price controls on the pharmaceutical industry. Let me see if I switch the tab. I think you guys can see. So first thing I would do is the pharmaceutical industry, right? I'd be like, oh, okay. I'd like look right here. Okay, it's the industry that develops, produces, and markets drugs for medications. Great. Now that I know that, I would search up like pros and cons of price controls on the pharma industry. Bam. Okay, and I'm just gonna like read a little bit through this. I'll just be skimming. All right, so right here, another potential consequence is the most important consequence then could be insufficient innovation down the road. Such a distortion in market incentives would be an obvious cost of price controls. Basically, what this is saying is that like if we implement price controls, then people don't want to like innovate and create new drugs because now, you know, they can't like charge as much as they previously wanted, right? Because right now, if you like discover a drug, you can get a patent on it, which means that you're the only one who gets to sell it for an X amount of years, right? So for example, if I like found a drug that cured like cancer, I would get a patent on it for like maybe 10 years so I can sell at whatever price because I have like no competitors, right? But now if the government's like, hey, you can't do that, you can only sell it for $10, I might not want to invest in trying to find this cancer like saving drug anymore because, you know, who knows what price the government will set at. Maybe I don't even like earn back the money that I spent on researching, right? So now what I'm going to do, and I'm just going to create a Google Docs. So this is going to be my neg contention, right? It's against the idea that we should legalize drugs. Contention. So my contention 1 will be innovation, right? So what I need to find is link. Implementing price controls decreases innovation. I need to find the impact, you know, what happens when innovation decreases. And then I need to find the warrant, okay? Why does implementing price controls decrease innovation? So I will find the link. Beep, beep. Okay, and sometimes when you're looking for one piece of evidence, you'll get evidence for a different price, right? So for example, right here, I actually found my warrant evidence, right? The R&D process, which just stands for research and development process for innovative drugs, is lengthy, requires billions, and is fraught with large risks. Price controls make it more difficult for manufacturers to recoup this cost of capital, diminishing the incentives to innovate. What this is saying is that creating a new drug is really expensive. If you implement price controls, it's really hard for them to make back the money that they spent like creating this drug, right? So this is actually going to be my warrant. So we can see that this is from Forbes. The year is, let's see, 2017. So I'm gonna write Forbes 17 finds that, that right? R&D is extremely expensive, which is why implementing price controls could reduce incentives. Oh my God, my computer is glitching. Uh-oh. Wait. Okay, sorry. Reduce incentives to innovate by making it difficult for companies to R&D costs. So here I've actually found my warrant first. And we can keep looking in the article. See, I haven't actually done this beforehand, so I'm trying to see how fast I can speed run this. Sometimes you can also say like, if you want like a specific number, this is what I do. Price controls will decrease innovation by, I just write like X%. And then, you know, like this percent thing, right? Even if you don't know a good piece of evidence, which does say something along the lines that you want. Wow, look right here. Cutting prices by 40 to 50% in the US will lead to between 30 and 60% fewer R&D process. Wow, right? So we could just take that, and this is from NBR from 2005. So I would write Ember 05 finds that. And sometimes you can just like copy and paste the direct, you know, article if you just want to quote it. Sometimes you can paraphrase. It really depends on what you want. You know, if the article is very confusing like this, like if you read it to a judge who has like no idea what the pharmaceutical like company is, or like market incentives, distortion, they're like, okay, I have no idea what that means, and they're not going to understand your argument. So that's why we like to do what we call paraphrasing, which is like rewording it by ourselves, right? But sometimes it's like very like clear for, right? Cutting prices by 40 to 50% will lead to 30 and 60% fewer R&D. So you can just like paste it in. The drug won't be confused. It's like very clear what's happening, right? So now we have the link. Cutting prices decreases by 60%. Now we have the warrant. This, you know, it's expensive to recoup these costs. So now we need the impact. Innovations, drug innovation saves lives. And what is good is, instead of like asking questions like, why does drug innovation save lives, right? Like that's a question. Instead, what you should do is just type a statement like drug innovation saves lives, and then usually you will find things that help you. So like right here, I'm like just reading through the titles, and these aren't things I want, right? Like cancer medicines have helped generate 43 million life years, and like people live longer. But I want an impact that's like, okay, for every drug, we're going to save X amount of lives. So I can be even more specific. For every drug innovative, we save X lives. Okay, we can click in. Sometimes you won't find exactly what you want. But one new drug saves X amount. Okay, so right now I'm not really finding what I want, right? But what I can do is take something that I didn't really want before. I can always look for better cards later, but when you're like grinding against time, like I am, like you need a case for this tournament, I would just take this evidence. So, you know, what is this from? This is from Value of Innovation in which year? 2013, right? Value of Innovation 13 finds that cancer drugs have saved how many? Wait, it disappeared. 43 million life years. 43 million life years. And if you guys are confused of what life years is, it's just like each year of a life, right? So for example, if I told you eating this medicine prolongs your life by 2 years, this drug has saved 2 life years. So if you multiply that by like 100 people, okay, this drug has saved 200 life years, right? So this is what it's saying. So there, you have like a very at the bones contention, right? Contention 1 is innovation. Ember 05 finds cutting prices by 40 to 50% in the US will lead to between 30 and 60% fewer R&D projects being undertaken in the early stage of developing a new drug. 417 finds R&D is extremely expensive, which is why implementing price controls could reduce incentives to innovate by making it difficult for companies to recoup R&D. Value of innovation 13 finds that cancer drugs have saved 43 million life years. So that is at its very bare bones a contention. Does anyone have like any questions about how I did this? Great. Okay, so you saw that took me I started at like 4 p.m. basically, so that took me like 15 minutes, right? So it's actually not that hard to write a contention for like the bare bones evidence that you do need. All right. Now that we're done with constructive, does anyone have like any questions on what we went over so far before I move us on to the next thing? Okay, I'll take that as a no. So now we're just going to review and go into a little bit more in depth of the other speeches in debate. So public forum debate has 4 speeches, as I've said, and there's 2 sides, right? There's a pro and there's a con. And if you don't know yet, public forum is for 2 people. So it's 2v2, right? 2 partners versus another 2 partners. And one side is going to be pro and one side is going to be con. The thing is, you can't always choose which side you're on. You don't know if you're always going to be pro or you're always going to be con. So you have to prepare cases for both sides and be ready to argue for both sides. So the first speech that we talked about was constructive, right? That's 4 minutes. Both sides get 4 minutes. And then the second speech is actually going to be rebuttal. And this is going to be another 4 minutes. And what this is doing is you're responding to your opponent's case. And in debate, right, both teams can't go at once. Like you can't both speak at once. So there's always one team that is the first speaking team and the other team that is the second speaking team. So if you are a first speaking team, right, all you have to do is refute your opponent's case. So if you think about this, Penn as the first speaking team and like this water bottle as the second speaking team, right? The first speaking team gave their constructive, second speaking team gave their constructive. Now it's the first speaking team's turn to give their rebuttal. All they have to do is destroy the constructive of the second speaking team, right? Now, if you're a second speaking team, you have to defend your own case as well, because what happens is constructive, rebuttal against this. Now, in rebuttal, this has to fight against this, but also protect against the rebuttals that this guy, the first speaking team, said against him, right? So when we defend our own case, that's what we call frontlining. Does anyone have any questions so far? Okay. So in rebuttal, I'm going to introduce you guys to 2 of the major forms or types of rebuttals you can give. The first is a D-link, right? So before we talked about links, this connects with that really well. A D-link just destroys the link in between these arguments, right? So for example, if the argument is, if my dog dies, I will be sad and get depression. The D-link would be, you know, the link right here is I will be sad, right? Because it links if my dog dies to getting depression. The D-link would be taking away that link or saying why that link doesn't lead to the next thing. For example, just because you're sad doesn't mean you'll get depression. That's a D-link, right? Because now you destroyed the link between sad and getting depression. You can also D-link it on the other side. For example, you can say just because your dog dies doesn't mean you'll be sad. Maybe you hated your dog, right? So if my dog dies, I will be sad. You now destroy the link between those two, because just because your dog dies doesn't mean you'll be sad, right? And if you won't be sad, then you also won't get depression. So you can delink at whichever point the link connects the 2 arguments, right? Now, the second major type is a turn, which is basically kind of what it sounds like. It's turning their argument for your side. So now if they're saying, oh, doing this is a bad thing, you turn it by saying, no, doing this is actually a good thing, right? Or if they say, oh, doing this is a good thing, you turn it by saying, oh, doing this is actually leading to a bad thing, right? So in this case, if my dog dies, I will be sad and get depression. The turn would be, your dog is actually a horrible, really mean dog. If it dies, you'll actually be happy, which decreases your chance of depression. Now that's a turn, because your dog dying is now a good thing instead of a bad thing, since you'll have a less likely chance of getting depression. So does anyone have any questions on a D-link or a turn? Okay, great. Now you guys try. Here is the argument. If I fail this test, I won't get into Harvard and I'll be poor. Can someone give me a D-link on this?
A dealing would be that Harvard doesn't even look at your like test.
Yeah, that's really good, right? So now you're destroying the link between if I fail this test to I won't get into Harvard. Like maybe Harvard doesn't even care about your test scores. Very good. Okay. Let's see. Does it Tyler, do you want to try destroying the link between I won't get into Harvard to being poor?
Wait, once again?
Yeah, sorry. Could you delink I won't get into Harvard and then I'll be poor? So can you like unlink those arguments, right? Delink it.
Um. I so like saying it in a different way, kind of.
No, delinking just means destroying the argument, right? So what this person right now is saying is, I don't get into Harvard, I'll be poor. Can you delink that? Say, okay, that's not true.
Yeah. So like maybe going to UW can make you successful.
Exactly, right? So one delink could be, just because you don't get into Harvard doesn't mean you'll automatically be poor, because there's always other colleges that can make you rich, right? You can go to UW, then you won't be poor because you still have like a college education. UW's pretty great as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sophia, can you give me a turn against this argument?
Maybe Harvard is actually a bad school and it'll make you poorer, so not going to Harvard is better.
Yeah, that's a really good term. And the same thing for delinks is the same thing for turns, right? You can delink the argument in the beginning or the end, right? You can delink if I fail this test, I won't get into Harvard. You can delink that, or you can also delink I won't get into Harvard and I'll be poor, right? You can delink those two. The same thing for turn. You can turn, right? I won't get into Harvard and I'll be poor. I'll be poor. Turn. Harvard it actually makes you poor, right? Or you can turn in the beginning. If I fail this test, I won't get into Harvard. Like maybe you can turn it. Oh, if you fail this test, but then you get better grades in the future, Harvard will think, wow, you're such a student that has like growth and potential. They'll let you in. And then that's how you turn it. So yeah, that was really good job, guys. All right, the next speech is summary. So you have constructive, rebuttal, and now you have summary. What this does is it summarizes the entire debate thus far, right? So if you add up the times, like that's 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4, that's 16 minutes of debate that you have to condense into 3 minutes of debate. So it's really important here to crystallize, which is choosing the key arguments, right? You can't say in 3 minutes everything that was said in these 16 minutes. Instead, you have to choose which arguments are the most important and like explain them well, right? The other thing you have to do is first summary needs the front line, which means the first speaking team needs to defend their arguments, right? Because if we remember from before, first speaking team constructive, second speaking team constructive, first speaking team rebuttal destroys their uh, constructive, sorry. And then second speaking team defends their case and then destroys first speaking team's constructive. Now first speaking team has to go back, defend their case, right? Because they just refuted their constructive. And then they have to go into their summary. So first summary needs to frontline their arguments, which basically means defend their arguments. And the most important thing that you have to do in summary, even if you have like no idea what summary is supposed to do, what you have to know is that you have to weigh why is your argument more important than theirs, right? Because at the end of the day, you're condensing 16 minutes of debate into 3 minutes of debate. And you're only choosing a couple of arguments. How are you going to convince the judge that your like 3 minutes of arguments was more important than everything that was said in the past 16 minutes? This is why you have to weigh. You have to say why your argument is more important than theirs at the end of the day. Now, what does weighing mean? It means that you are taking your argument at face value and their arguments at face value and saying why yours is more important, even if your opponents win their argument. So what weighing is not is, oh, for example, right? Their argument is like not going to Harvard will make you poor. And then my argument is not going to Harvard will actually make you rich, right? It's not saying, oh, actually, wait. Okay, let's say like the resolution is legalizing illicit drugs, right? So basically, if you legalize these illegal drugs, people can come out of jail and they won't be in poverty. And then on the next side, if you legalize these drugs, people will get addicted. What you have to do is compare why is poverty more important than addiction. Weighing is not, oh, poverty is more important than addiction because they didn't even win their argument, actually, Judge. They like failed to respond to XYZ in rebuttal, right? That's not weighing. That's just like giving another rebuttal. What is weighing is even if you believe everything my opponent said and you believe that addiction will happen, poverty is more important because of XYZ reasons. Right? And there's these things called weighing mechanisms, right? Which is another word for like ways to weigh. Wow, that's weird. Ways to weigh, to help you weigh your arguments against other people. So here I'll do an example, climate change versus a recession. I hope, does everyone know what like both those terms are? Yeah. Okay. So climate change is like, global warming. Recession is like when the economy goes down, right? So the first weighing mechanism you can use is magnitude. So that's how big the numbers are. You can be like, oh, climate change impacts everyone in the entire world and future generations, right? Because, if we have no more coral reefs, we can't enjoy the coral reefs and our children in the future can't enjoy the coral reefs. Versus a recession, the economy is going up and down all the time. We've seen a recession like the Great Depression, right? And we also had a coronavirus recession, but now people come out of it. So the number of people affected is much smaller than climate change because climate change is across generations, it's the entire globe, whereas recession can just be like, in one country in the US and it's not like, for generations. The second is reversibility. So what this means is basically like on time, can you change it back, right? So if we think about climate change, like once we go past like, I think everyone says like 2 degrees warming, right? That's like a point that we can't come back for. That's what people say, right? Like, oh, by then, like our climate will be so destroyed that there's no way that we can fix it. So it's like you can say that climate change is irreversible because you can't fix it, right? Once you're past 2 degrees Celsius, you're doomed. Whereas a recession, you can be like, oh, it's very reversible because, if we go into a recession, the government can like give us more money and then we will come out of the recession. So it's very reversible. So that's why climate change is more important to solve than a recession. And then the third and probably the most important and most intuitive way of weighing is probability, right? How probable is your impact? Okay, climate change, right? If we keep emitting carbon, you'll see climate change happen and like all of these bad impacts that we have already been seeing for years will only get worse in the future. The probability is very high because we've seen historically climate change has been very bad. In the future, it will be very bad as well. For a recession, you can be like, oh, the probability is actually very low because you don't know if like certain things will cause a recession, but also, historically, a lot of economists have always said, oh, we're going to go into a recession. We're going to go into a recession, but we didn't, right? So you don't know what the probability of recession is or how badly it will impact people because all recessions are different. But what you do know is that climate change is like really bad for the environment. We've seen the harms to people that it's caused. So that's why it's very probable. Okay, so now this will be the final exercise of the day because we're running out of time. But now you guys have to try weighing not doing homework versus getting more sleep. Which one is more important based on magnitude? So, does anyone want to have a stab at this?
I'll try.
Okay.
So based on magnitude, magnitude probably, it's how magnitude is like how big of an issue it is, right?
Yeah, it might be hard to do magnitude here. You can do like, let's say,
Depends
yeah,
on
you can
reversibility.
weigh magnitude of like the hours you spent doing your homework and like the hours of sleep you get.
So, but like I feel like this will be like different based on personal views.
That's okay.
Now for me, not doing my homework has a bigger magnitude than getting more sleep.
Mhm.
Because doing homework is important, and if you don't do it, you get a bad grade.
Okay. Would someone like to do reversibility? Sophia, maybe?
Okay. So I think I would say something like getting more sleep in the long run is better because, as we've seen before, it is really damaging to your health and therefore is really hard to reverse. While if you don't do your homework, you can still make it up or just do some extra practice outside to get your grade back up.
Mm.
Would that kind of be reversibility?
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, that's the entire point. Basically, like, oh, you can always change your grade, but you can't always, catch up on the health that you already like, I don't know, if you get cancer from not sleeping enough, you can't just like uncancer yourself by sleeping more, right? Okay, Tyler, would you like to use magnitude, reversibility, or probability? You can choose one. Oh, Tyler, are you there?
Tyler said he can't.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, never mind.
Yeah, I can't really talk that much because, yeah, but,